Hi, Daniel. How are you today?
Doing very well, thanks.
I know it's been a little bit difficult to get an interview with you. I know you've been real busy taking care of your father and many things that you have going on in your life. But I'm very excited because I want to cover a few items and a few things that I know that a lot of people are interested in, and I am too, because I'm learning now that I have met you and know you. I have learned a lot of things that I was very naive, and I'm still naive. But I want you to. I'm going to ask you a few questions, and I know for a fact that we're going to learn a lot from your experiences and who you are. So, my very first question to you is going to be, what is a Jew and who is a Jew?
Okay. The Jewish people are the descendants through the flesh, in the flesh, the physical descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God called Abraham and he promised him a son. He had a son, Ishmael, but with his maidservant. So that wasn't obviously the promise. Then years later, he had a son with his wife. That was Isaac. So it's Abraham and Isaac. Isaac with Rebekah, his wife, they had twins, Jacob and Esau. They were fighting from the womb of the mother. But God said, the older one will serve the younger one, meaning that the younger one will be the bigger one. And Jacob had 12 children. Those 12 children, descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, are the 12 tribes of Israel. And even until today, everybody who is a Jew, call himself a Jew, is somebody who is a descendant from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. My name is Daniel Schnaider. This is interesting, I think. But Schneider means tailor in German, because we used as surnames the trait of our ancestors, of our elders. When I'm called at the synagogue in order to read the Torah or for any reason, I am called Daniel ben Yaakov, Daniel son of Jacob. And my father is Yaakov ben Moshe. Moses was my grandfather. So we are descendants. We are the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the 12 children of Jacob, the 12 tribes of Israel, and somehow along the lines through all the centuries, it's been 4,000 years since Abraham, we kept our identity, our descendancy. Say it's too many years. Well, the problem with Jews all through history is not that people wanted to become Jewish, but it's that through persecution, people wanted to hide their Jewish identity. So it wasn't that difficult. You didn't want to belong. You wanted to leave the Jewish community.
So, Daniel, if and obviously you're a Jew, but tell me, what are the most important moments in the life of a Jew?
Well, there are really 4 moments
Okay.
in Jewish life. The first one is called the Brit Milah, or the circumcision. When a Jewish person is born, is circumcised. Circumcision is called in Hebrew the Brit Milah, the covenant of the word. God gave a covenant to Abraham that he has to circumcise his children. And in circumcision, a person, the baby, when he's 7 days old, 8 days old, actually circumcised, the baby becomes part of Israel. So you enter into the covenant through circumcision. Of course, it's the father, the one who decides to circumcise his newborn baby. So it's a decision of the father to include the baby into Israel or not. If somebody is not circumcised at the 8th day by a moel is a rabbi who's also a doctor. He performs the circumcision ceremony and the person becomes part of Israel. 8 days old. The second moment is the bar mitzvah, when the boy is 13 years old. You remember Yeshua, Jesus, when he was 12 years old, he stood in front of the rabbis. They interviewed him. I was interviewed by the rabbis when I was 12 years old. And when I turned 13 years old, for the first time in my life, I stood in the congregation, in the synagogue, in front of the whole constituency, the rabbis, and I have to chant something either from the Torah or from the prophets. There were 3 kids, they chanted from the Torah, and I knew Hebrew well, so I chanted from Ezekiel, happened to be that day, Ezekiel 38, Gog and Magog. That was the portion that I have to do. What happened in the bar mitzvah is that until that moment, the father is responsible for the sins of the son. But from that moment on, the son, it's considered himself responsible for keeping the law. So the rabbi gave me the law in that moment. I read from the law, from the prophets, from scripture, and from that moment on, I was responsible myself to keep the law of God. The rabbi gave me, which God gave Moses, the Jewish community. So first is Brit Milah, the circumcision. Second is the Bar Mitzvah, 13 years old. The third very important moment is the Chuppah, the Jewish wedding. It's a little different, the Jewish wedding, from the Christian wedding. In the Jewish wedding, 2 people come under a canopy. There are many details. Don't go into that right now. But they stand under a canopy. The couple, the boy and the girl, are going to get married, both Jewish, both part of the house of Israel. And there are many witnesses, people in the ceremony. The most important thing is that out of that union, the next generation of Israel will come until the Messiah will come. So Jewish wedding established genealogy. Israel continues through the Chuppah, through the Jewish wedding. A Christian wedding is very nice, but it doesn't have that value. A Christian wedding in the mind of people typifies the coming of Christ and the church, the wedding supper of the Lord, Jesus and the church, and it's very nice, of course. But in Israel, the wedding established genealogy. The next generation of Israel will come out of it, out of that union. There are many more details, but that's the main thing.
Okay.
The fourth one is a Kaddish, the Jewish burial. Many details again, but the body is washed and put in the coffin and is wrapped in the prayer shawl, the talit that we use all our lives. The important thing of the talit is the fringes. When you see the fringes, you remember God's commandments, and it's tied. The fringes are tied around the body of the deceased person. Putting on the coffin is closed, put it on the ground. The whole idea is that people are sleeping in the dust. People who passed on, they are there wrapped in the commandments of God, waiting for the Messiah to raise them from the dead. Do you remember when Jesus rose Lazarus, he untied them? Well, this is the messianic call, untie them. And one day that will happen. So those are the 4 moments.
Okay. You know, when I was writing down the questions I was going to ask you, I was thinking, I said, I don't think I'm going to have any problems because you go into very much details with the answers, and I appreciate that. So thank you for doing that for us, clarifying. I know there are 3 branches of Judaism. I hope I'm correct. If you can briefly explain to us, what are they?
I need more. 2 branches in
Three branches.
3 branches in what sense?
And I'm talking about
Because there are several branches.
the religion.
Oh, you're talking about Orthodox, Conservative, and Reform.
Exactly, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let me clarify a little. There is an historical branch
Okay.
between Ashkenazim and Sephardim.
Correct.
The year 70 AD, Jerusalem, the temple, was destroyed by the Romans, and Jews left in two directions mainly. Some went into Europe and they settled in Germany, what today is Germany. Those are called the after the year 70. By the year 300 AD, you have the German Jewish community, those who settled north of the Roman Empire, north of the Alps. And those are called Ashkenazi Jews. Ashkenaz in Yiddish means Deutschland, Germany. Another group went from the from Israel that was destroyed by the Romans, went through the north of Africa into Spain. And those are the Sephardim. In Hebrew, Sepharad is Spain. That's one division. Okay. So you have the 2,000 years until today, the German Jews. Then the German Jews, the Ashkenazi, moved to Poland and Russia, France and England. And the Sephardim, some of them came with Columbus and first to the New World, to Central America, South America. But you're asking me something else. You're asking me not historical branches of Judaism, but the religious branches of Judaism. Judaism was always Orthodox. Judaism historically was always the religion of the Pharisees. Pharisees were the leaders. Sadducees were the leader in the temple. Pharisees were the religious leader, the rabbis. And that is always, there were different rabbis, different schools, different groups, but it's a religion, it's an Orthodox religion, Judaism. Orthodoxy, doxo means law. It's a religion marked by the law. Answering a long question very briefly as just give you some information. All that was carried through the centuries, Orthodox Judaism, different schools, different degrees of orthodoxy. But was that until 1790, we can say, more or less. 1790, the Jews received in France by Napoleon Bonaparte a right that we couldn't reject. We became French citizens. We were always in the ghetto. We were always like the gypsies. We were always the Jews in the nations, tolerated and expelled from many nations. Napoleon allowed us to be French, gave us French citizenship. France was, there's a long story between the Jews and the French people, very, very close. In a few years later, Jews received citizenship in Germany, German citizenship. Started in France, then it was Germany. And in Germany, they became a group of, being German citizens and then Austrian citizens, Jews were allowed to go to universities. Jews were allowed to live secular lives. Secular Judaism starts in Germany in the 1800s. A Jew is a Jew, has a Jewish name, but it's a private thing. And we were allowed, for example, to go to universities. The University of Berlin, the University of Vienna took the first Jews into medical school. Freud, Einstein was also part of that group of secular Jews. Very, very important. And what happened in Germany is that a religious Jewish movement was created called Reform Judaism. What is Reform Judaism? They say somebody is Jewish not because of religious practice, not because you eat kosher food, special food, not because you light candles on the Sabbath, not because you celebrate Yom Kippur or Passover. No, you are Jewish. Reformed Jews say you are Jews simply because your parents are Jewish, period. They redefine Judaism. Judaism is no longer going to be defined by religious practice or belief. Now it's just by inheritance. That started in 1800s in Germany, 1860, into the 1800s in Germany. So, for example, German Jews will go to their synagogues and they will read the Bible in German now. They will use Martin Luther translation of the Bible to the German, but it's a Jewish service. Then they came to America, many of them, and many people fell in America like Orthodox, dressing in a special way, eating special food, living in close communities. It was too much. It was way back. Reform is too much. It's almost like Christianity. You enter into a synagogue and you won't see a big difference. So in 1900s in New York, they created conservative Judaism. In conservative Judaism, this is what they say. The rabbi looks Orthodox, but the people live secular lives like the Reform. I grew up conservative. Conservative Judaism, they have respect and value for the Hebrew language, the language of the Torah, and for our traditions, but people live secular lives. They don't wear a hat wherever they go. They don't live in ghettos or restricted neighborhoods. That's conservative. So you have Orthodox, conservative, and Reform. And I must add, 1967 was the Six-Day War, and Israel conquered again the city of Jerusalem, and something happened. The Messianic Jewish movement started. Jews that started thinking about, hey, Jesus, Yeshua, his Hebrew name, was the last generations of Jews in Jerusalem. Then Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans. We were expelled all over the world. But there's something very important in the person of Jesus. And we started understanding, we came to the conclusion, Jesus was not a regular man. This is what he said it would happen. This is God incarnate, God been among us. So Messianic Judaism is a new thing that started by God in the heart of Jewish people and started after 1967. There were always some, maybe Mendelssohn, the composer, there were always some Jews who maybe found faith in Yeshua, but because they have a Christian grandmother or something like that. But really the Jewish Messianic movement, synagogues, Messianic synagogues, Jews that they say, I'm 100% Jewish, my parents are Jewish, but I'm also 100% a member of the body of Christ. I've been baptized in his name, I'm part of the church. So that is a conflictive description of a new movement, the Messianic movement.
Wow, Daniel, you make me nervous. You are full of knowledge, so much, and I better get my years and my time right, because I know you're going to correct me many times. But okay, we cover a little bit about the Jews, who's a Jew, and a little bit about the three branches of Judaism, which you talked about: Orthodox, Reform, and Conservative. But I want to touch now in the part of the state of Israel, because let me put it this way: I've always known since I was, a teenager, or when I was in school, that the state of now Israel was called Palestine. Even in the the map, whenever you see it, of course, it's Israel, but it was Palestine, 1940, 1945, 1946. And
I think we move into the camera. I want to check. Can you pause this a little?
Yes. Let me ask you briefly. When was the birth of Israel? What happened? That's very interesting to me. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, so you're asking me now about the state of Israel. It's a long question, depends how deep we go. Israel was born around Mount Sinai, 3,500 years ago with Moses. We left Egypt, we were slaves, we arrived to Mount Sinai, and then at the feet of Mount Sinai, Israel was born. Moses led us there. That was 3,500 years ago, more or less. Then from Mount Sinai, we were at the feet of the mountain, early Israel, 1 year. And then we walked to the promised land, to conquer the promised land. God told Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, God told Moses, I want you to take the Israelites out of slavery from Egypt and take them into the land that flows with milk and honey, into the land of Canaan.
Okay.
So Israel was put at the feet of Mount Sinai, and then we conquer the land of Canaan.
Okay.
Deuteronomy 7, it's a difficult passage for us to understand today. We are sensitive. Our generation is sensitive to this because God tells Moses, tell the Israelites when they enter into the land of Canaan, conquer 7 nations. Utterly, this is Deuteronomy 7 in English, utterly destroy them. Show no mercy to them. God says, this is the promised land. This is Deuteronomy 7. God said to Moses, say to the Israelite, enter into the land. There are 7 nations that you don't know. Destroy them completely. Show them no mercy. Utterly destroy them. Okay, I have to go fast to answer this question, but the nation entered, and the nation did not destroy those 7 nations. The nation of Israel, the Israelites, enter there. We conquer the cities, we conquer the land, but we thought it was an awful butchery to kill everybody. It was wiser to take them as slaves, so we didn't destroy everybody. What happened 1 or 2 generations later is that Israel is worshiping their idols, and we are using their customs, and they have awful customs to Moloch, their god, another goddess, and we are adopting their practices, and we have a big problem with the Lord. And so when the Lord said, utterly destroy them, God knew why he was saying that. Okay. One of the nations that were in the land, one of these 7 nations, is the nations of the Philistines. The Philistines. The Philistines we didn't destroy them because they were in one corner of the land. They were in the Gaza Strip. We came from the Jordan River, we crossed the Jordan River, we encountered 6 nations, but the Philistines were on the coast, so we didn't touch them really. And the Philistines lived among us. Gaza, the old name for Gaza is Gat. Remember Goliath, the giant of the Philistines from Gat. Gat is Gaza, from the Gaza Strip. They persisted there. And we have always problems with the Philistines. Why? Because we didn't obey Deuteronomy 7, which seems to be ridiculous. The shed of blood, utterly destroy them. But that was God's commandment. We didn't do it. We were more reasonable and more human than God. And because of that, one of the nations that remain is the Philistines. Let me explain you this. The letter P in Hebrew is the same letter as the letter F. There is a letter, it's called the Pei or Fei, same letter, softer or stronger, like telephone. You can write with an F or with a PH, or pharmacy with a PH or with an F. It's the same letter, really. And the name for Philistine or Palestinian is the same name. Now, the Philistines, then, the Palestinians, are a nation that always remain in the Gaza Strip. And years later, Saul was our king, for example. Saul was our king. Saul did not kill them, remained with them, and when Saul committed suicide, he killed himself, the Bible says, and the Philistines crossed the Jordan. I hope you understand the map of Israel. If the Philistines were in the Gaza Strip, crossed the Jordan River, that means that they went all over the land. So the Philistines always advanced over the land. In the year 70 AD, centuries later, when the Jews were expelled all over the world by the Romans, the Philistines, the Palestinians, moved into the land. When Israel was destroyed by the Romans, and they called that land of Canaan the land of Philistia or Palestina. And that is the problem with the Philistines or with the Palestinians, the older Philistines or the Palestinians today. They claim a right to the land. They were one of the Canaanite groups that was never got rid of from the land in the time of Joshua, in the conquest, Moses and Joshua. And that is the big problem until today. The land was the land of Israel that was destroyed by the Romans in the year 70 AD. I hope you can follow this, a lot of history. We were expelled, and we have the German and the Spanish Jewish community, German Jewish community that I mentioned before, and the Philistines, they moved the land, and the land is called Palestina or Philistia. It's the land of Canaan, it's the land of Israel, Philistia. Now the Jews always remember, we were in Germany, in Spain, and then we were in Poland and France and Russia, and we moved through Europe 2,000 years. But we always knew we have a promise from God. The promise of God is that land will be for you and your descendants. And if God is faithful, eventually we'll come back to that land. And wherever the Jews gather, we finish one of our religious ceremonies, we say, Hashana haba b'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. Suddenly, 1940s, the Nazis, Second World War, many of us died, many people died. But then after Second World War, 2.5 years later, suddenly the Jews come back, and the State of Israel was born in one day. In 1948,
Wow.
He was born again, the State of Israel, and now it's the State of Israel. The UN, the United Nations, did what we call, in 1948, the partition of Palestine. They took the map of Israel, the ancient map, they gave a land to the Palestinians, they gave to the Philistines, the Palestinians, the coast, they gave the Jews another land, and they wanted Jerusalem to be corpus separatum. 1948, Jerusalem will be an international city. But the Philistines are now Muslims, and they are now considered part of the Arab world. They're not Arabs, they're not Saudis, they're Philistines, but they would not accept that. Israel started the war with them, and Israel miraculously advanced over their territory. And the Philistine nation, the Palestinian nation, never really existed. Israel survived, became a little bigger, and then there were other wars. Of now the Philistines are their Muslim friends. The Muslim religion started in the 600s, and they got together, but that is basically the problem of Philistine, Palestine, and the Jews. 1948, the birth of the Jewish state. It's not the birth of the Jewish state, it's the rebirth of the Jewish state, because we came back to that promised land. But the whole problem is Moses or Joshua. They didn't obey God's commandment. We didn't get rid of them, utterly destroy them. Read Deuteronomy chapter 7. Deuteronomy is the last book of the Torah, the Pentateuch, the last words of Moses. Devarim, the last words of Moses. And it says, the Lord said to Moses, enter into the land, you will find 7 nations, utterly destroy them.
Wow.
So that's a little of the conflict.
Wow.
Until now, people talking about the right of the Philistines or Palestinians to the land. They were there for a long time.
Okay.
But the problem is complicated, and now they're trying a two-state solutions and many
Correct.
other
A lot of stuff
ways
going
to
on.
solve a problem.
Daniel, you touched a little bit, or you mentioned World War II. The World War II ended in 1945, and I don't want to mean to be disrespectful to you, but I have a question that I asked myself, and you might know the answer. They say that 6 million Jews died. Who counted them? How do they know it was 6 million? That's a lot of people.
The 6 million Jews died, and many more million of people from all the nations died. The Second World War, something very interesting and very strange to this respect. Europe had wars before, Europe had wars during centuries. But suddenly, another day I'm going to explain you First World War, very important. But Second World War, suddenly Germany develops the leaders in Germany, Nazi Germany, they developed a plan called the Final Solution. This is the heart of Second World War. The final solution was Adolf Hitler's plan to exterminate the Jewish people. Yes, Germany declared the war to Poland. The war started when Germany declared the war to Poland. England entered against, and then Germany started advancing over several countries. Germany wanted to control all Europe and all the world. But Mein Kampf, the book of Adolf Hitler, Hitler never said that there will be no more Polish people over the face of the planet. Hitler never said that there will be no more Russians over the face of the planet. Yeah, they said that there will be a government of German people controlling, but Hitler did say that there will be no more Jews over the face of the planet. That's called the Final Solution. So Hitler wanted to exterminate the Jewish people. When it comes to that point, you realize it's not politics. It's something beyond politics, where Satan has a plan, where a promise of God that there will be Jewish people until like the stars of the sky, like the sun on the seashore, you realize that there is something against the promises of God. That we will read the Bible, and we will read the Bible 1900s, middle of 19th century, that we will read the Bible, and we will read in the Bible about the Israelites and about King David and Israel and the prophets, and they will be all fantasy, because those people disappear. Those people are no longer. That is what Hitler tried to do. The Final Solution, it's called. And it's very interesting, that he built concentration camps, places to systematically come to the final solution, the extermination of Jewish people. 6 million died. I think 3 million survived, if I'm not wrong. But 6 million died. Of course, there were census, the Red Cross, the United Nations was the League of Nations and became the United Nations, and then they started having census, and people realized how many people died. But the Second World War ended, and 2.5 years after that, the birth of the Jewish state happened 2,000 years later. What is the Holocaust? What is Second World War? The state of Israel was about to be reborn after 2,000 years. Jewish people were already in Palestine. And suddenly Hitler, with his, what Satan was trying to stop, obviously Satan, because he was a satanic wrath, was trying to stop the Jewish people from coming back to the promised land, because if the Jewish people are back in Israel, if Israel becomes a nation again, then that's the most important sign for the second coming of Christ. And Satan is trying to impede, to stop, to prevent the second coming of Christ. So that is the importance of Second World War. In the middle of the 20th century, it's not too many years ago, 70 years ago, 80 years ago, Germany, the great nation of the Reformation of Martin Luther, the great nation of Goethe and the philosophy, Germany becomes with a plan to exterminate the Jewish people. The Jewish people were spread all over the world for 2,000 years. If there will be no more Jewish people, how can you believe in the Bible? You remember, God was about to destroy us one in the desert. And Moses said to God, you can destroy them. The Egyptians will say, God was not able to introduce them into the land. God couldn't deal with them. And God preserved us. If we were destroyed by the Holocaust, if 3 million more, 3/4 were destroyed, if we were all destroyed, how can you believe in the Bible? How can you trust the Bible? Who are these Israelites, these Jewish people? Well, the church became Israel. You will have to start inventing things. No. We survived the Holocaust. Immediately after the Holocaust, 2.5 years, the state of Israel was born again. And the most important thing is this. God told Abraham 4,000 years ago, a man, just a Babylonian man, traveling through the land. God told Abraham, this land, the land of Israel, this land I will give it to your descendants. That's what he said. 4,000 years ago, later, the descendants of Abraham by the flesh are the ones inhabiting that land. It's not the Zionist movement, it's not a political achievement, it's God's promise before the second coming. But the number 6 million, I think, was given by the League of Nations. The League of Nations was in Brooklyn, then they moved to New York and became the United Nations with the Red Cross. The world was a mess after Second World War. I have a friend here in Houston who was born in a displaced people's camp. Displaced people camp were those people that were Jewish that didn't know where they belong. In Austria, but it was a displaced people camp, and then they were sent to Palestine, to Israel, when Israel was born. All of that is less than 100 years ago. It was the 1940s that all of this started happening.
A lot of information, Daniel. We're going to have to watch the video over and over and listen to it over and over. It's very, very interesting information. You, obviously a Jew, you practice Judaism. You did your bar mitzvah, but you're also a Christian. How did that
And
happen?
I have my certificate of circumcision.
You have the certificate of circumcision,
Yeah, I have a
exactly,
paper
in
that-
Hebrew.
It's in Hebrew. It says Brit Milah.
Exactly.
Brit Milah, Darkon.
And of course, your parents are Jewish, your mom and your dad and their parents, and on and on and on. And of course, I've seen all that because I asked you a lot of questions in the past. I didn't understand, and sometimes we don't. Not that we don't believe what we don't believe, but so how did you started being a believer? Where did you? How did the Bible come to your mind? Why did you started believing? And of course, the Bible has been in our hands for many centuries. But how did you start it? Why did you?
It's interesting when I ask Jewish people, why do you believe in Jesus? And I ask Christians, why do you have this love for Jewish people? They all answer, it was alone. It was me and the Bible, and I look at the promises of God and how God talks about the Jewish people, and I started loving them, and King David and the stories. For me, I grew up going to kindergarten Jewish, elementary school Jewish, in Argentina. My family escaped from Germany to Argentina. Part of the family came to the States. Part of the family went to Israel, newborn Israel. And my grandparents came to Argentina, and we went to Jewish school. From kindergarten, we read the Tanakh, we read the Bible in Hebrew. It's incredible how God works. I was always influenced by psychoanalysis growing up. We didn't go to see a rabbi. We went to a psychotherapist. Because Freud is from Vienna, my grandfather was from Vienna. And he was in a session of psychotherapy. I always spoke for hours. How can I be Jewish and be German and be Argentine and all of that? I came to the States for high school, and when graduated, went back to Argentina. I was studying law in Argentina. This is the way it happened. Somebody invited me to a youth group of a Scottish Presbyterian church in Buenos Aires. Friday evening youth group. And I went just to meet people. I knew that the people from that Scottish Presbyterian, they were from the Scottish school, and we played rugby with them, and we used to play soccer with them, and they were very cool. And so I went. And they were studying the book of Romans. They gave me the Bible. I have no idea what Romans was. Group of 25, 30 young kids. The Bible study was fascinating. They were studying Romans chapter 4, and they were talking about Abraham and the faith of Abraham. And I was interested. I knew Abraham was the father of the Jews. I was very interested. And the second time I went, second Friday, they gave me a Bible. They all signed. I didn't say anything that I was Jewish, so they may kick me out. But this is my story. This is the story of my people. I don't study the story of Scotland. Why are they studying the story of Israel? And so fascinating. And Apostle Paul and the talk about the faith of Abraham. I decided I was going to start reading the Bible. They gave me that Bible. And I don't know why, I decided to start reading the story of Joseph, the son of Jacob. And I look at Joseph, how he got promises from God. They were jealous, but his father loved him more. And I like him, and how Joseph was sold to Egypt. And I say, he was probably a nice young kid. This older woman looked at him and wanted to sleep with him and all of that. And God promised, God was with him, and God blessed everything that he did. And I thought, if this is being Jewish, being like Joseph, is much better than being German. For years I hid my Jewish identity, and I would call myself von Schnaider. I pretend to be German. I says, if being Jewish, I thought, is the fiddle on the roof, and they kick us out from everywhere, I'd rather be Jewish. But if being Jewish is this, being like Joseph, having these promises from God, and this relationship, they may be jealous about you. It's okay, let them be jealous, they're losers. God is with us. And finally, Joseph becomes prime minister of Israel. I said, this is beautiful. What I couldn't achieve in years of psychoanalysis, I achieve alone with the Bible, proud of my identity, satisfied, happy, nothing better than what I am for me.
Beautiful.
And that was the beginning. Then I read the life of David, King David, and it was beautiful. Of course, it's beautiful. 6 months later, I was ready to read the Gospels, the life of Jesus. And I was a little afraid. And I said, Lord, if I'm going to get confused, don't let me do that. And I read the life of Jesus, and he was a rabbi. Everything was in the synagogue. In my bar mitzvah, I have to use suits, and I chanted by memory. I didn't know what I was chanting. And Jesus talks about, oh, you Pharisees who stretch the fringes and look for the first places in the synagogue, everything to be seen. And he said, that's me. All the religion to be seen. And all of that. And suddenly I look at Jesus and I say, this is absolutely beautiful. And the first conversation I have with the Lord, they told me, ask Jesus to come into your heart. I would ask him, but he knows what he has to do. Finally, I'll ask him. And can I tell you this very briefly? My own tradition. They told me, the Scottish Presbyterians, St. Andrew's Church, they told me, go into your room. Jesus said, go into your closet and be with your Father alone. I said, like that. And I would wash my hands, put a white shirt on me, and lock my bedroom and spend time with the Lord. And one day God spoke to me. I never heard this clear in my mind, alone in my room. He says, Daniel, you come to me with your white shirt, all clean and washed, for me to applaud you, right? Approve, go. Well, Lord, in your presence I have to be proper. He says, if you can be proper and clean, you don't need me. But you and I know that your life is not all proper and clean. I was reading that part that says, healthy people, the Gospels, Mark, healthy people don't need doctors. I have came to say that which was lost. What in the world is that? Healthy people don't need doctors. If you are all clean, fine, white, in order, you don't need me. Why did you come to me? But you and I know, don't be fake, he said. You and I know that you're not all clean, fine, and in order. You and I know that your fingers are yellow. You can't sleep all night long and you're smoking in your bedroom. Your fingers are yellow of nicotine. You are in your early 20s. And you're tired and you backache. And you and I know that you are not clean and in order. So don't come to me like that. He says, I think you're right. I never thought in those terms. Healthy people don't need doctors. You know who goes to the school? Illiterate. Because if you know everything, you don't need to go to school. Well, it was one of the first conversations with the Lord. And I said, you're right. What am I doing? I'm being fake. I'm coming to you just to be approved. It was a little longer than that, the conversation. It was beautiful. You know what I did? I took the white shirt off. I put the previous shirt, and I sat in a chair like that. And I said, Lord, here I am, just as I am. I'll give you my life. You put me in order, because I can't. I can't. I am not healthy. I am have very dark areas in my life. I am not really healthy, and although I'm 20 years old, I need doctors. If you can put me in order. And he said, I take your life. I am going to do something with your life. And he started changing it. It was beautiful how I knew English. Somebody offered me to teach English classes in the morning. So I have to, in companies, in American companies in Argentina. So I have to get up early, take a shower. I have to suit and tie. I have to put my life in order. And little by little I started walking with him. And then I said, this is completely true. This is completely real. I don't want Jewish traditions. I don't want moving here and there and reciting prayers. I want a relationship with the living God.
Wow.
And that's how I became a Christian. Although I'm 100% Jewish, both my parents are Jewish, my grandparents, all of them are Jewish. I'm 100% Jewish. I'm 100% a member of the body of Christ. I'm 100% a member of the church at the same time.
Wow. Daniel, I know that the Jews are very close and very, together. Always you see them together. You don't really mix, kind of, sort of, if I want to say. I think now it's a little bit different, but didn't mix in the past. I don't remember, I think you're the first Jew that I've met. But how did your parents take it? Because they're not believers, or they were not believers, and I bet you it was very hard for them. Tell us a little bit about that.
It was the year 1984.
Okay.
And the reason why Jews are separated, God told us to be a holy nation.
Correct.
Holy means separated. We are separated nations in a big degree. But when I became a believer, I knew they couldn't understand this, my parents. And I was trying not to offend them. Then I would go Sunday morning to a church, and my father would say, send my regards to the priest. Ironically, he would say that. And one day I said, well, I'm going to witness to them. They have to take it. I'm going to tell them about Jesus. And my father hit the table, and he said, the dinner table, I started talking about Jesus, and he hit the table, and he says, to have a son with Down syndrome is less punishment than this. To have a converted son. My mother started yelling at me, and my sister says, why are you so stupid? You have nothing better to do with your life than going to a church. It was difficult. I went to my room, and I kneeled down in front of the bed, and I said, Lord, I don't want to offend them, but I'm insulting them. You put the moment when they can hear. I'm going to try to be a good witness with a good life. And the years passed, and my mother became very interested. I'll tell you the testimony another time if you want to hear it, because it takes a few minutes.
Sure.
But she became a believer. She went to be with the Lord in 2014. Wow. And her Bibles, I gave her a Bible, and it's all, I have it with me right now. It's all highlighted passages. She became a believer, and my father is with us now. She's 92. And he comes with me to church sometimes, and he's accepting this. It was difficult, but there's a lot of tradition. There is a lot of work of Satan blinding us and not letting us, the Jewish people, think about Jesus. It's something ridiculous. You cannot read world history. You cannot understand that we were a nation between Abraham and the year 70 AD. And in the year 70, right after Jesus came, Jerusalem was destroyed. We were spread all over the world, and that's what Jesus said it would happen. You cannot really understand the history. It doesn't make sense without Jesus' involvement. I understand that the rabbis are trying to stop this because they don't want the chaos in their congregation, but it's the most beautiful thing. And everything Jesus did was so Jewish. Everything is in Israel. It's in the synagogue, on the Sabbath, and the temple.
Right.
Very Jewish. So eventually Jewish people are going to stop having their own traditions and fears from their deceased grandparents and great-grandparents, and they're going to realize that Jesus is the most beautiful character in the whole story of Israel.
Daniel, I went to a class, a Bible class, many years ago, many years ago. And the instructor was teaching us a Bible. He was talking about a book. I don't remember which one it was, but he told us that not to worry, not to look into the Old Testament. It's not as important as the New Testament. And that was my teacher, my instructor, and I believed it. I questioned to myself, I wonder why, because it's one book. But I didn't understand. And tell us why the Old Testament is so important as the New Testament. Touch on that, please.
Okay, there's a change happening in Israel. There's a change also happening in the church. And that position was probably the Christian position for 2,000 years. Israel was destroyed. The Jews are spread among the nation. And that's the position of the church for 2,000 years. Don't read the Old Testament. The first question that we have to ask is this. We have the text. Who put that page that says New Testament between Malachi and Matthew? Who wrote that page? Malachi is the last of the prophets in this book. Didn't write that page. Matthew didn't write that page. Somebody very anti-Semitic who hates Israel wrote a page that says New Testament. Imagine, if your father writes a New Testament, is because he got you out of the will. So, putting a New Testament, that means that Israel got out of the will. A professor in Israel said, that page that says New Testament, that somebody put there, nobody has the authority to take from the Bible or to include in the Bible. You cannot write a page there and put it in the Bible. A professor in Israel said that page that says New Testament shows the Christian doctrine, Christian belief, the Christian doctrine on the eternal damnation of Israel. God wrote a New Testament, rewrite the Testament. That is the Christian doctrine, the Christian belief that Israel was damned, was cursed for eternity, and God wrote a testament. Now it's the church, it's no longer Israel. But who in the world put that page there? That's the most anti-Semitic page that there is. And pastors in the whole world talk about in the Old Testament, the New Testament, because of those two pages, Old Testament and New Testament. It's a way of editing the book. The way we study in Israel this book is the formation of Israel, and then there is First Temple period, and then there is Second Temple period. And in Second Temple period, there is a part, all New Testament is Second Temple period Jewish literature. So that page, it really has all this effect. God wrote a New Testament. Now it's us, it's the church. And it's no longer the Jewish people. And what you have in the New Testament is all Jewish people, still Second Temple period. The New Testament is Second Temple period Jewish literature. Second Temple started. I don't have all the time to explain all of this, but think about it. Second Temple started with Ezra and Nehemiah, and it goes all the way the Gospels. The Gospels, the life of Jesus is all Second Temple period. There's not Old Testament and New Testament. And really the Christian belief that Israel was replaced by the church is ridiculous. Okay, you want to believe that? Today Israel is back in the promised land. We are back there. God is dealing with us again.
Wow.
So now Israel is replacing the church again? No, it's completely wrong. It was an anti-Semitic view through history that God wrote a New Testament. Jesus takes in the Last Supper, the Passover meal, in the upper room. He says, this cup is the new covenant in my blood. Yeah, there was an old covenant in Mount Sinai. This is the law. There's a new covenant. We are only saved because of the blood of Jesus. This cup is a new covenant in my blood. King James translates, this cup is a New Testament in my blood. And from there they take New Testament, Old Testament. There's no such a thing of New Testament. There is an old covenant in Mount Sinai. The same night, an old covenant through the blood of Jesus at the cross. I don't enter into heaven because I keep the law perfectly. I enter in heaven. I can enter in heaven because he fulfilled the law and his blood covered me of all unrighteousness. I think 1967, Six-Day War.
Yes.
After 2,000 years,
Yes.
Israel got back to Jerusalem. Jerusalem
Yes.
became the capital of Israel, and something happened. That in the Jewish community, the beginning of the Messianic congregations, Messianic Jews, and in the church, a love for Israel that was never there. The church never loved Israel. Israel was the cursed nation. But suddenly, Christians started traveling to Israel, saying how much I love the Jews.
Correct.
And a professor of theology last year, his name is Shackley, and he was in the church and he was teaching theology, and I mentioned him on purpose. Maybe you know him. He came to me and he says, Daniel, I wish I would have been Jewish. You know how much I love the Jewish people. It's such a nice thing. And he wanted to become Jewish.
Very
and
special.
many have told me that.
Daniel, the Bible has 66 books, and what is your favorite? What is your favorite book?
My favorite book. The Pentateuch, the Torah is great. Genesis is amazing. Genesis, creation of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the children of Jacob.
The beginning.
Deuteronomy is called, listen, I wouldn't have time for this, but the Greeks call it Deuteronomy. Ridiculous. It's called Devarim. Words is Moses' last words. Yeshua, Jesus loved that word, that book. He quote from that book more than anything else. So Genesis, Bereshit, it's called Bereshit. It's no book of numbers. What is numbers? God said don't count. It's called In the Desert, Bamidbar.
In the desert, right.
Tremendous. Book of Psalms. Who can live without the Book of Psalms?
Right.
Book of Psalms is mainly David. There are others, of course, talking to God, and it's the heart of David with the Lord and the psalmist. Sometimes I don't know what's going on, and says, "Oh my soul, why are you so downcast inside of me? Oh my soul." Soul, shut up. We are going to worshiping now. Psalms is tremendous. Of course, the prophets. Prophets are, in Hebrew, the word for prophet is Navi. Come from the word Navuv. Navuv is the boiling of the milk. A prophet is not a teacher. A prophet is somebody like boils like the milk. You put the water in the stove and it boils, it bubbles. But you put the milk and explodes. That's a prophet. Prophet Daniel. It's one of my favorite. Daniel is a kid, 15 years old. And Orthodox Jews today, they talk about the numeric value of this word and the other, and all this kind of nonsense, stupidities. The word Bereshit, in Israel somebody told me Bereshit, the first 3 words of the Bible is the word of the Trinity. Bet, Ben, Son, Ruach Haba, Spirit and Father. And then an Orthodox came and says, look at the last 3 words, Torah, Yeshua, Sheker. The law of Jesus is a lie. The Orthodox are wasting their time with that stupidity. Daniel was not that kind of stupidity. Daniel entered in his room alone, and God showed him the dream of the king. And God showed him the governments that will come to the earth. And he understood times and governments. That's a true prophet, not Orthodox nonsense.
So you're really...
So Daniel is tremendous. And then the Gospels, the life of God made man, dwelt among us. Mark is nice, how Jesus moves, he's short, he's Matthew is beautiful. I've been going slowly in the book of Revelation because it's too much. But it's beautiful. There are several books that are amazing.
They are. It depends on what time. What
Proverbs.
Oh my God,
The wisdom
Proverbs,
of
exactly.
Solomon.
Yes.
So nice.
Yes.
But you have to look at the life of Solomon. At the beginning, he was very conservative, but then he started saying, at the beginning, if you're lazy, the grass will grow under your bed. Very conservative. And then he says, I saw many unbalances on this life. A man who worked very hard, and then at the end of his life has nothing. There's also that.
When he was older.
He started realizing that he wasn't that dogmatic.
Right.
There is a reality, yes, there is a reality, but don't be so strong in your own opinion. that you will say there's no other way of looking at reality.
Daniel, I know we have, so much to touch and so many more questions to ask you. Very, very interesting. And I'm just going to ask you one last question. But before I do, I would like to talk to you again. Give me that opportunity. Because when I told you, since I was a child, I've been called Hispanic or Latin. And when you told me what Latin means, it was something completely different than what I thought and I understood. And I want to touch on that later, and also about the Arabs and the Muslims, and why extremely interesting.
Very.
I don't want to get into that at the moment, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about that, maybe second part. But my last question to you is going to be, I know, and don't get upset at me, but I have to ask you, is the Bible true? Does God exist? How do we know that? I want you to tell the people, what do you think? How do we know it's true? Tell us about that.
It's a tremendous question. There are many ways of answering. I'll tell you my answer. When I started thinking and questioning if my faith is true or it's just religion, 4,000 years ago, okay, a man from Babylon moves. He hears Abraham. He hears God telling him, leave your country, leave your family, leave your land, and go to the land that I will show you. He doesn't know where he's going, but he knows that God is going with him. That's the story of Abraham. He doesn't have any nonsense goal setting. In 5 years, I'm going to be here. In 10 years, I'm going to be there. 15 years, my career. No. He lives without knowing where he's going. But he knows that God is going with him. Several things happen. He crosses the land. He comes to a small piece of land, the land of Canaan. And God interrupts him and speaks to him the second time. Spoke to him the second time. He says, to your descendants, I will give this land. And he built an altar, and he says, wonderful, but there's no food there. He keeps going to Egypt. You see, two civilizations in the old world, Babylon or Egypt. He's going from Babylon to Egypt. Like today, you either go to Europe or you come to the United States. Two big markets, two big places. So he keeps going. Well, he gets in trouble in Egypt, and he's expelled, and he comes back to the land. 4,000 years ago, God said, to your descendants, I will give this land. He's in Canaan. He's in a tree. He's there. There's nothing. Okay, 4,000 years later, today, the descendants of this man are in that land. We went through a lot. Science says, anthropology says, a nation that loses the land and the language for an extended period of time disappear. We lost the land for 2,000 years. We lost our language. We weren't prevented from speaking. We spoke Ladino, we spoke Yiddish, other things.
Correct.
4,000 years later, we are back into that land. The promise of God. We are back into that land, and we are speaking Hebrew again. The land that God spoke to that man, Moses, and he wrote the Torah, the Pentateuch, we are speaking it again. I mean, is that possible? That is a whole fake. One man, 4,000 years later, is coming. It's a promise of God. It's what God covenanted himself with us. I will give you this land to your descendants. The promises of God are very serious, are not whatever. God doesn't lie. If he promised something, it's because maybe he wants us eventually to keep him accountable. You said. For my grandparents, great-grandparents, they were in Europe. There was no land of Israel. It was difficult to believe. For me, I see that the promise given 4,000 years ago came back. That is one way for me to think. This is not a folk tale. This is not literature. This is not just a story. This is not Shakespeare. This is not Plato. This is not Greek poetry. This is the promises of God. This is the word of God. And the descendants of that man, Abraham, are in that land speaking Hebrew, the language of the Torah. Again, So I don't think it's a make-believe. I don't think it's a fake story. I don't think it's just literature. I spoke with a pastor once, great unbeliever. It's a shame of himself to be a pastor. And he says the Jews are like the Native Americans. They always cling to their land. They always want to be back to their land. He said the Jews were expelled all over the world. The Jews from Argentina are very Argentine, but Israel is something important for us because Israel gives them defense. Yeah, that's part of it. But people in 1948, my family, they sold everything and they went to the land of Israel to be part of the new government, to be part of this country. It cannot be a make-up story, fantasy. 4,000 years later. Listen, it's not something written last year. It's not made up. It was written, it happened 4,000 years ago. And it was carried through the generations. And that small piece of land, that's exactly, by coincidence, no coincidence, that's exactly where the descendants of Abraham are today, speaking the language of the Torah, the language of God. God spoke to Moses. The Lord said to Moses, say to the Israelites. He was speaking in Hebrew. That's the language. So it's not a friend of mine. We grew up together, Jewish guy, Jimmy Cohen. And I go to Argentina last year and he says, I was an agnostic, now I'm more an atheist. I says, give me a break. When are you an atheist? You just don't know anything of anything. Your whole life is to buy real estate and make money. That's why you don't understand anything. Listen, explain me Abraham's promise and what happened today. It's not a made-up story. That's one way of looking at it. There is much more. The promise of God, what happened. If that's a lie, then the prophets are a lie. And the prophets spoke on God's name. And all of that is coming again to reality. It's much easier for me to be a believer than for many generations of Israel because of the land of Israel.
You also mentioned one time that talking about if that's a lie, and sometimes the believing of the parting of the sea, and about Mary having Jesus, and I was asking you about it, and you said, well, Natty, if that's a lie, then everything's a lie. The whole Bible is a lie.
Yeah, it cannot be lies. I remember my mother, before she was a believer, she says, yeah, the Virgin Mary, right? And all that. She was making fun. And she's Jewish. And he says, don't make fun of the Virgin Mary. Do you believe that the waters of the Red Sea parted? Do you believe what happened in Mount Sinai that God spoke? If you don't believe our promises, why are you making fun of the Christian promises? The Word of God has those things. There are things that offend us that didn't offend people 100 years ago. And there are things that will offend people in the future that are not offending us, because God deals with every generation. But because I cannot understand everything, I cannot put this away. I know, I study with Koreans in Argentina, Korean seminary. Koreans are offended by things. They are offended by how the structure of the family, how God says one man to leave his country and go somewhere else. And the structure of the family is not what the church believes really today. The apostles, we don't know who their families were. And they are offended by that. I'm not offended by that. I like missions. I like to be called like Abraham and go. But God deals with each one because there are things that I cannot understand. I'm not going to dismiss the whole revelation because it's beautiful.
Well, Daniel, I know you have to go, and I have to go as well. But thank you so much for your time and your energy, your dedication, and explaining to us a little bit of this whole view of a Jew and the Bible and the war. I know we're going to touch again also. We'll touch on World War I as well. But thank you so much, and I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
God bless you.
Thank you. God bless you. Thank you.